You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
So happy to have you with me today. Really excited to get into our Total Wellness Tuesday show on why Candida diets simply do not work. And I want to explain all of that today. I want to do it from a scientific, but also really a clinical perspective, meaning that I want to share with you what does work in the end. I want to show you why it doesn't work. Just give you the exact information you need to understand why where you're at right now with your nutrition plan, it's not enough. It's not going to get you back the life that you want, the health that you want, the body that you want. So if you're suffering right now from any of these symptoms of Candida, such as exhaustion or really a craving for sweets or for carbs, if you're dealing with any type of brain fog, like I used to have, I'm going to get into that, any type of hormone imbalance, joint pain, muscle pain and weakness, lower libido, any type of sinus or chronic allergy-based issues, especially like ear, nose, and throat-based issues, any digestive issues, gas, bloating, anything like that, even loose stool or constipation can be a Candida-based symptom. A weakened or dysfunctional immune system, which I'm going to chat about that as well. Chronic urinary tract infections, any type of bacterial vaginosis, halitosis of the breath, any bad breath. All of these things can be symptoms of Candida overgrowth. And what is Candida overgrowth? Well, Candida overgrowth is basically all of us, literally every single one of us, are born with different strains of Candida in the gut. It's not just Candida albicans. There's Tropicanus. There's a bunch of different types of Candida. But for our purposes, we're simply going to call it yeast. And that yeast is actually beneficial. It's beneficial in certain ways with manufacturing certain vitamins and minerals and helping the overall process and microbiome of the gut. It's supposed to be there. Just like a lot of people don't know, you actually have E. coli in your intestines as well. And that E. coli helps to manufacture things like B12. So we're meant to have these bacteria and this yeast in our gut. Even strep bacteria in our throat, we always had that. We just don't want it to overgrow. So the point is that all of these things can live harmoniously in our gut. This is going to be important at the end when I tie it all together, but it can't overgrow. Okay, so how does it overgrow? Well, one of the ways that it overgrows, and this is very, very typical, and again, not everyone's susceptible to this, but everyone to a small degree, but not everyone to a larger degree. One example is when I was 17 years old, I had already swallowed 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin. That's 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin. And that's because at the age of 14, my parents took me to a dermatologist. I had some acne. And he said, okay, well, we're going to give you amoxicillin, and you're going to take this twice a day, and you're going to take it indefinitely. There was no coming off of it. So I took that for 1,000 days. That's 2,000. And then even before the age of 14, I used to take antibiotics all throughout the winter, anytime I got a cold. No, I mean, like a case of the sniffles, here's a Z-Pack. You know, oh, you have a little cough, here's some amoxicillin. We were just given all sorts of antibiotics just throughout the year. And again, this isn't my parents' fault. They had no idea. This was all the doctors. And this is, again, was it even really the dermatologist or the medical doctor's fault? Not really. I mean, they're just literally doing what the American Medical Association teaches them to do. Okay, acne. Well, one reason to have acne is because of bacteria. So maybe we'll just give them this for bacteria. I mean, it's terrible. It's really just putting a Band-Aid over an issue, but it's a terrible, terrible thing to do. But anyway, that's what I went through. And then all of a sudden, though, at 17 and a half years old, all of a sudden, the antibiotics stopped working, and then all of a sudden, my immune literally shut down. It shut down overnight. I became extremely sick. Many of you have heard my story. I went to multiple doctors with no one really being able to figure out, except that I had viral-based issues, increased and decreased white blood cells. Finally, they figured out what it was, and what it was is not important. You can check out previous shows for what it was. But what I want to say is this, is that I could no longer modulate the inflammation in my body. I had all of the symptoms, basically, that you just heard before. I had the brain fog. I literally had all of those specific things. Couldn't think. I had not a white coating on my tongue. I had white and brown coating on my tongue. It was like this thick coating. It was absolutely disgusting. I had hormone imbalance. I was getting legitimate hot flashes just trying to sit there in school and just sweating through my shirts, and that was not me. Sinus infections, massive allergies, all sorts of digestive issues, pain all around my belly button area. Obviously, I had the imbalanced immune system and massive cravings for sugar and sweets. Here's the thing. It got so bad that doctors couldn't deny it anymore. They just couldn't help me. I could not walk up a flight of stairs without my heart rate skyrocketing. And that was only 6 stairs and trying to hold on to the railing. And I mean, these were some real troubling times. I can talk about it now, but I couldn't talk about this for 15 years. Like, it was that bad. I only started talking about this a couple years ago. And because the pain of still thinking back to it and how little anyone could do for me and knowing how bad my parents wanted to help me get well was just really too much to think back about. But now I have the understanding. Now I know how to help people in the same exact condition. And that's what I want to do on today's show, because what happened was I ended up with this massive heartburn and I had allergies and all sorts of GI issues. And I went to a specific specialist. Finally, they figured out, or just finally after doing an endoscopy, which is basically they stick a camera in a little tube down your throat. And what they're looking for is maybe H. pylori, which I had, and they're looking for other things. Well, for me, they found that I had yeast growing all the way into my stomach, all the way up my esophagus, into my mouth. And of course, they were horrified. And so all the GI specialists could do was send me home with a prescription for diflucan. And diflucan is an anti-yeast medication. But the thing is, and they didn't know it back then, they're getting a little bit better now. Integrative doctors know at least that you're supposed to use diflucan and nystatin if you decide to go the drug-based route for at least 4 to 6 weeks. And you're supposed to up and down the dosage. Like, there's a whole protocol if you want to go that route. I don't use that route because I'm a naturopath. I choose not to use any type of drugs because I simply believe that in the short term they work, but in the long term, I know that we have to balance the body. We need to be gentle with the body rather than just punching it all the time or punching all the pathogens, and be a little bit more gentler and get the body back into balance rather than just kind of drop a bomb on all these different things in our body. And then, we say, okay, well, why did this go wrong? Why did this go wrong? It's because you're using a sledgehammer on a thumbtack. It's completely unnecessary. So what happened was that, sure, I took my 3 days of diflucan and knocked it down a little bit, but the issue was is that it didn't do much. It came right back. And I had the same exact symptoms. I had the allergies. I had the chronic stuffiness of the nose. I had the pain in my gut, especially after meals. I had just, if you would push in anywhere in my stomach, it would be extremely painful. Doctors didn't know what that was. I mean, I still to this day cannot understand why they don't know what that was. They're like, well, there's no organs there. It's your small intestine. I mean, blows my mind. I went to the best specialist in the world in Boston, right? My parents, they wanted to do the best for me. They didn't know where to turn. They say, we need to go to a specialist. We need to go to a specialist. You can't figure out what's wrong with my son. Here's the thing. They're pushing in 1 inch to the right of my belly button, 1 inch to the left of my belly button. And they're like, well, we don't know why he's wincing in pain. We don't know what that is. It's my small intestine. So later figuring out, yes, it's yeast overgrowth. It's Candida overgrowth. It's SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. How did you not know that back then? Like, that to me just blows my mind. And anybody today, they can kind of feel for themselves to see if that's the issue. But again, before I really start to digress, I now at least knew that it had this thing called Candida overgrowth. And although the conventional medicine didn't really want to recognize it back then, they still don't want to recognize it today, but of course we know it's there. I had actual diagnosed proof. I had a GI doctor put a tube and camera down my throat and actually show me the photos of this white coating growing all the way up my stomach and esophagus. So at least I knew, like, okay, all right, well, this is one thing to work on. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know right now for sure that I have this yeast overgrowth. So what I did was I started to research that. And again, this was back in the day. It was back in the day before the internet, or before I had the internet, at least. There was dial-up back then, but we didn't have a computer, so it wasn't that type of thing I could look for me. But many doctors, many naturopathic doctors, many health practitioners, of course, had been working on yeast overgrowth for decades before this, decades. And so I went to my library and I grabbed my books on Candida. And there was a few different Candida diets. So I said, okay, this is the place to start. I know what to do. Look at these results. People got this result. They got this result. They're feeling better. Fantastic. That's what I did. So I went on the Candida diet. And after about 3 days, 4 days of following the Candida diet, no more than a week, I started to get massive symptoms. I got terrible brain fog. I got terrible depression, really, really low mood, super irritable, like you didn't want to be anywhere near me, and these full body flu-like symptoms. Brain fog, headaches, all my joints hurt. It was bad. I mean, walking up a flight of stairs back then, I thought was bad. Not like this. I mean, this was remarkable. What did I do for this Candida diet if you don't know what that is? I cut out all of my starches and I cut out all of my fruits. So the only thing I could have basically were my vegetables, my proteins, which were, meats and fish back then. And I was eating a lot of meat back then, and my fats. So I could have that, but I couldn't have anything at all that contained any real sugar except for some vegetables. Okay. But even again, back then, 20 years old, not a big vegetable eater, right? Not a lot of 20-year-old guys are, or hopefully there more are today. But I was the guy who grew up on Kool-Aid and Little Debbie snacks and Wheaties or Frosted Flakes and Fruity Pebbles and Captain Crunch and all those things for breakfast. So that wasn't really my thing. And again, my parents didn't grow up that way. My mom gave us great dinners every night, but during the day, I'm not really with my mom. So, I was eating whatever I wanted to eat. That was the truth. There was 4 of us and we were all close in age, and we just kind of made our own breakfast and got out of the house and ate whatever the French bread pizza was at school and just went from there. So here's the thing. When I cut out those starches, I got terrible symptoms. Like I said, the brain fog, the depression, the flu-like symptoms, whole body aches and pains. At the time, I thought that this was die-off because I had read about this before. I'm like, oh, these are just die-off symptoms. I need to push through. After 2 weeks of pushing through, I said, there must be something wrong with me. Like, I'm not doing it right. I don't understand. These people are getting results. I honestly feel like I'm dying. I feel worse. And if this is what it's going to take to get rid of it, I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm just like, I feel worse. So I came off. All of a sudden, what happened was then my symptoms just blew back up. They didn't. So maybe my gut felt a little bit better on the Candida diet. Yes, but I felt terrible on it. So what happened was this. I didn't know it at the time, but it's what we know now is called the keto flu. And what happens is when people do the keto-based diet incorrectly, where their protein is too high, when you cut out all your carbs, you really need to dramatically increase your water intake, which I wasn't necessarily doing. Okay, so it's hard on my kidneys. Everything was getting backed up. The other thing is, if you're on a true, more keto-based diet where you cut those carbs down, it's really supposed to be 75% fat, very little protein, like honestly, very little protein. And that helps you then from not having your body convert that protein over to glucose. I don't want to get too much into this. I've spoken about this in the past because this isn't a keto-based show. So what happened was my body actually wasn't burning ketones or anything like that. I started literally breaking down my own organ tissue and my own muscle tissue. I was so catabolic that my body was feeding off of itself. I was looking more gaunt. It was a mess, like a legitimate mess. But a learning experience today, so I could share it with you now. And I know now that was not die-off. That had nothing to do with die-off. I mean, die-off can feel like headaches. It can have a little bit brain fog, yes. Some skin rashes, maybe a day or two of feeling run down as your body is clearing the system. And again, you have to be following the protocol where you're moving this out of your intestines, that you're helping your liver work well enough, like all of those things. But not for a week, not for 2 weeks. This should not go on and on. You do not want to feel like you have flu-like symptoms. That is not it. Yes, there may be some die-off, but at the same time, I'm going to teach you at the end how to back off so that you don't get that type of die-off as well. But the truth was that I needed to figure this out. I would get the courage back up after another couple months, and I said, okay, I'm going to try this author's book. Maybe this author's book gives me some more insight. Okay, this author allows these types of berries. And I'm like, oh, okay, so, I would do some of that. But no starches, no grains, okay? So I'm trying that. Oh, feeling a little bit better. But eventually, here's what happened. Feeling a little bit better. But eventually, I need some actual carbohydrates, especially as that Vata Kapha body type, that I need some carbs. I was playing sports. I was weightlifting. I was training in the gym. Like, I needed some fuel for my body. So what happened was every time, though, I just reintroduced some fruit again, some starches, as the ringworm on my elbow started to just flare back up. I would get the gut pain. I would feel very bloated. I would start to retain water and start to look kind of like swollen and puffy. Might start to get a little bit of joint pain. And so I knew at that point that there was something to the Candida diet, that it was important, but for the long run, it would never get rid of the Candida. And I said, why is this? So I really started to look into it. I really started to study it. So this is back now, now we're at about 15 years ago or so. So I'm looking deep into it. And I start to get deep into the textbooks, and I understand now that Candida is always part of the body. And that Candida, believe it or not, outlives us. After our physical body dies, the Candida is still living. It lives off of the host, which is us. It's a fungus. When I now realized that Candida works from a fungal-based perspective and that it grows like a fungus, like a mushroom in nature, I realized that I could not fully eradicate it. That I was supposed to keep some of that Candida in my body, but keep it within check. And believe it or not, that Candida is actually part of what decomposes the body, just the body after we're gone. And so when I read that, I understood. I said, this is not a war of annihilation where I'm trying to just starve out the Candida because it's going to win. It's just going to win. That's just the way it is. And that's because at some point in my life, I'm going to eat carbohydrates again. And when I do, I haven't done anything to change the terrain, which is the soil in the gut, right? The microbiome. It's the different bacteria in the Candida. And because I didn't change the terrain, then when I put those carbs back in, those starches, it feeds everything. And the Candida already has taken up some placeholders in the intestines, right? So basically what happens when you take the antibiotics, you're wiping out a lot of bacteria. But the antibiotics are not antifungal, and yeast is a fungus. So as the antibiotics are wiping out the good bacteria and the bad bacteria, yeast is like, great, we'll move in. And it begins to proliferate. It begins to spread. And now you have increased Candida growth, where at one point you had good bacteria. But now that good bacteria can't grow anymore, not in that space, because Candida has already taken its space. That's what I didn't know back then. That's what I didn't understand. That's what the books didn't teach me. And again, they don't even teach this in naturopathic school. They don't. Naturopathic school is amazing. Again, I'm not talking down on it at all. If you're thinking about becoming an ND, please do so. It's absolutely fantastic. If you're already a health practitioner or you're a coach, you don't want to go to become a naturopath, you can study functional medicine. That's great as well. They're still not going to teach you this in depth. They're not. There's very few people teaching this right now. I'm not the only person, but there's very few people teaching this right now. Why do I know it, or why have I looked into it at this level? Out of necessity. Honestly, it's out of necessity. I had to heal my body. So this is what I did. Once I realized that, I said, okay, we need to look into a multi-prong approach. I need to eliminate Candida through both diet, but a diet that's realistic that I can do. And I need to eliminate it then through natural herbal-based products that they've been using for over 6,000 years in Ayurvedic-based times. And again, this is before I ever went to India, before I went to Sri Lanka, before I studied in China, before in all these places. Because again, Chinese medicine, they did this as well. So what I did was this. I began to study all of the herbals that have been used. They've actually been used in South America, used all around the world. I was interested to see that some were antibacterial and some were antifungal. And so what I did was I started to just make notes. I created a journal on all these different products, and I experimented on myself. And then I felt real die-off. I felt, okay, oh, wow, this is what real die-off feels like. Okay, my skin's starting to break out a little bit, got a little bit of headache, and I was like, I just went too much. I did too much of the antifungals, okay? So then I backed off. Okay, the Candida still didn't go away fully, but I was now healing my body. What I then realized about another 5 years later, and this to today is almost unknown, is that the way to truly eradicate Candida is to use a diet that doesn't eliminate all carbohydrates, because that's unnecessary. You need to allow people to actually feel good and have energy. You need to eliminate the foods that are higher in fructans, higher in lactose, and higher in sugar alcohols, and higher in anything called fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides, okay? That's part of the methodology, the FODMAP, but it's only one part. We go much deeper. We look at individual foods and lectins and their body's ability to produce histamines, because once you have Candida overgrowth, you have allergies typically. And that's because you have intestinal permeability, you have leaky gut. There's debate right now of whether or not the hyphae, or the legs of the Candida, the roots of the Candida, just like a mushroom, can actually pierce the intestinal wall or not. We don't know. But what we do know is from the alcohol and from the birth control and from the Advil and from the antibiotics, those things and stress actually do open up the gut wall. And so then we have those proteins spilling through. But worse than that, we also have the waste from Candida that comes through. And that's why I can't recommend enough running something called an organic acids test. It's a simple urine test. You literally urinate into a cup first thing in the morning, just about 1 inch of urine. That's it. You mail it back to the lab. The lab tells you, do you have yeast overgrowth or not? Yes or no? That's it. The stool test isn't as good for testing for yeast. It's amazing at testing for parasites, bacteria, H. pylori, E. coli overgrowth, all of those, okay? Because the bacteria survives the lab. The yeast does not. So we look for the waste markers with an organic acids test. I ran that. I saw that I still had my levels, but now I could go to work. So what I found out was this, and I'm not going to do a whole show on this because I'm going to actually link up to how I heal the gut. I did this before on a 3-part series about how to assess leaky gut, how to fix leaky gut, and then how to seal it. So basically, I talked about assessing it, removing the pathogens such as yeast, and then resealing the gut wall. But I'm going to give you the synopsis of that, and then I'm going to give you each of those individual 20-minute shows. So now we know that you can't starve out Candida. It will starve out you. You can't. You are not going to starve out Candida with a Candida diet, and that's why it doesn't work. You need to use a Candida diet, okay? You need to, but it does not need to eliminate all of your starches. You can still have some squashes and sweet potatoes and things like that, okay? You can still have vegetables, and you can still have about a dozen different fruits. It's just specific ones. So here's the thing. You can't starve out Candida because it's going to outlive you. What you need to do is actually use an anti-Candida herbal-based protocol along with the Candida diet that then, when you start to eat the carbohydrates again, you've already wiped out a lot of the Candida. Then you put the place markers back in for the specific strains of probiotics. First, the Lactobacillus acidophilus after you use Saccharomyces boulardii, and then multiple strains after that. That is exactly how you do it. So then when you add the carbs back in later, and even things like onions and garlic, which you're not supposed to have because they're massive prebiotics, we teach all this. After that, when you start to add those things back in, now you're preferentially feeding the good bacteria, and yes, a little bit of yeast, but that's okay because now the yeast is kept within check. That is the only way to do it. There's not 2 ways to do it. There aren't. There's only one way to do it. You might use different herbals, you might use different supplements, but only one way to do it. With the nutrition plan and with the nutritional supplements. That's it. And then after you're done with the nutritional supplements, you seal up the gut wall and you finally become human again. That's what I felt like. You finally begin to heal. I had to do that first. I had to do it first before I overcame Addison's disease, before I overcame this thing called POTS syndrome, before I overcame the myalgic encephalomyelitis, the blood sugar issues that I had, all the autoimmune-based issues I had. I had to, and that's because this. Until you fix your gut, your immune system is going to be imbalanced. And that's because you're going to be spilling proteins into your bloodstream. That is called increased intestinal permeability. When you eat proteins, they spill in your bloodstream. Your immune system gets fired up because it sees a foreign object in your blood where your gut, your intestines are supposed to be the outside of your body. It's only supposed to let individual amino acids in there, not amino acid-based strands. So until you do that, you can't reduce the inflammation. Sure, you can take the turmeric. Sure, take the curcuminoid. Take the best of the whatever. Take the boswellia. Take all of those. Fantastic. But it's not going to fix you. It will never fully modulate the immune system until you heal the gut. It's the first place to get started. So you run the organic acids test. You check that out. If you want to check for parasites, you want to check for H. pylori, I recommend that as well. Then you run a stool test along with it. But the organic acids test comes first because it's going to show C. diff and it's going to show the waste markers for Candida and 75 other biomarkers. I mean, it's amazing. But that is what we do first. So we look for that. Now, if you're not able to run that test, you will do something called the Candida and Bacterial Overgrowth Protocol. And at the same time, you might say, well, I'm working with a functional medicine practitioner or a health coach, and I want to use their plan. Totally fine. I'm okay with that. I will always be okay with that. What I provide on that page, and I'm going to link it up today, so simply go to stephencabral.com/725. And when you go to that page, you'll actually see the nutritional supplements that we use. You can decide to do whatever you like. I want to explain to you why they work, and then you make the right choice for you. Here's why. You have to use a biofilm disruptor. That is when I finally figured it out. That is what most people are not doing. So once I discovered that the way that you truly eradicate the parasites, the yeast, the bacterial overgrowth like SIBO, that you help people with IBS, with Crohn's, with colitis, with IBD, with SIBO, with Candida, the way that you help those people is that first you have to remove this thick biofilm that, again, we know exists. You can just type in biofilm. You can find out all sorts of information on PubMed, everywhere else. Once you remove the biofilm, now for the very first time in your life, because remember, a Candida diet's not going to starve that stuff out under the biofilm. Sure, it will temporarily knock it down, but it's going to grow back. By removing the biofilm, you now are allowed to actually access the yeast and the bacteria and parasites with herbal-based protocols and herbs that have been around forever, such as Paudarco, such as caprylic acid, such as oregano, such as black walnut, such as all these other major products, berberine. I mean, these things have been used for thousands of years. Why? They're plants. And the indigenous people in every different type of population knew that. They studied the plants. They knew the plants. They knew what they work for. My job as I believe, a truly integrative practitioner is to take state-of-the-art lab testing, such as the organic acids test, the stool test, and then also combine that with state-of-the-art functional medicine nutritional supplements, orthomolecular nutritional supplements, such as the biofilm disruptors, which are just enzymes. They're proteolytic-based enzymes. And then I combine that with the ancient healing knowledge of using things like natural antifungals and antibacterials, which is part of this Candida and bacterial overgrowth protocol. So if you have the Candida overgrowth, you probably maybe have a touch of the SIBO as well, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or vice versa. And this works on both. And that's the amazing thing, that a lot of these antifungals are also antibacterials, and a lot of these antibacterials are also antifungals. So that is the best way to do it. If you want to see exactly how to do that, I'm going to link up those show notes. For now, if you're interested, you say, you know what, I had a lot of those symptoms. I can't figure it out. It's like a mystery-based illness. Then if you run an organic acids test and or stool test, I will actually read your lab for you, and we'll link it up in the website. I'll read your results, and then you'll get a coaching call with one of my holistic health coaches. You'll get my personal recommendations for you. We'll take you through a protocol to see exactly what's wrong, not just the Candida overgrowth or bacterial overgrowth. If it's there, if it's not there, we tell you. Meaning like it might not be Candida. And that's why if you test, there's no more guesswork. You figure out what else it could be in the gut, because there are other reasons why, meaning like different peristaltic movements in the gut that aren't happening, stress-based, there are other things that can cause it. So my goal for you, and I want to make sure that I'm doing this by you right, is to help educate you on why some things work and why some things don't. Meaning like for some people, the Candida diet can work absolutely great and they're happy and all of that, but a lot of times they relapse. Now the people where it just worked great for, well, those people might have just a minor touch, just a little bit, okay? But there are those people out there, maybe not as bad as I had it, maybe somewhere in between, that are saying to themselves right now, why is it that I'm craving sweets so much? Why is it that I can't lose the weight? Why do I feel tired all the time? Why do I have the halitosis? Why do I have the joint pain, the muscle weakness, the low libido, the chronic sinus space infections? You know, what's up with all the pain and digestive and bloating and gas? Sometimes that's a reflux, the immune system, the urinary tract infections. You know, why am I getting all those things? Well, a big reason, an overlooked reason, is often Candida. And so I applaud all of the people right now that are recommending all of these, anti-Candida diets, but it's not enough. I don't want you to suffer the way that I did for many, many years until I did figure it out. Now that I figured it out, we've been doing the same exact protocol for over 5 to 6 years now. We made little adjustments between years 5 and 6, always trying to make it better. That's it. If I can always find a way to make it better, I'm going to do that. And so what we do right now is we help people literally every single day in our practice overcome digestive issues. 2/3 of our practice is basically digestive issues. I hope to one day be able to help you in some way. And if this was helpful, let me know. Let me know on Instagram. Just go to @StephenCabral, leave your comment right there, or go to cabralsupportgroup.com and let me know if this episode was helpful. I'd love to hear some feedback. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate each and every one of your listens. And as always, please feel free to share this show with anyone you believe it could help. Before you go, I wanted to share a personal story with you. The real reason I began to get well finally is because I figured out what was wrong with me. And that might seem pretty obvious, but I went from doctor to doctor for over 2 years before discovering at-home functional medicine lab testing. These are the labs that enabled me to finally figure out what was wrong with my hormones, blood sugar, electrolytes, and gut health. And once I knew what was wrong, I could then follow a proven plan in order to rebalance my body from the inside out. This is why I believe so strongly in functional medicine lab testing and why I've made it my mission to share these labs with the world. Now at equa.life, you can order an at-home lab test or a lab bundle for you and your family and be able to complete it within the week. Plus, the EquaLife difference is that you're not left to try to read and figure out these labs on your own. We explain what your lab numbers mean, what they mean in the much bigger picture, and then how to go about rebalancing your body in order to heal. To see our full selection of lab tests or to set up a free lab selection call to find out what labs may be best for you, simply head on over to equa.life/labs. And do remember, we ship these all over the world. To find out more and to set up your free lab selection call, simply head on over to equi.life/labs. That's EQUI.LIFE/labs.